Hello and welcome back. Well, it's good to continue. Now, I've started recording these mostly the night before because it just works better with my schedule. So if you notice that I'm starting to look more and more like scrubby, that's why. It's because I'm home, it's evening, I'm cozy. I've got to turn that down. Hold on. There we go. Our fake fireplace. It's crackling too loudly. I was just watching Antiques Roadshow. Oh my gosh, I love Antiques Roadshow. I could watch it all day. My boyfriend always makes fun of me because, he doesn't make fun of me, but he's always like, "Oh, what are you watching?" Look, I still haven't dealt with this. Oh, I'm gonna do that later. Because every time it's always like some sort of documentary or Antiques Roadshow or a fake fireplace. And then he promptly puts on some sort of action movie that makes me cover my eyes. Okay, we're going to continue with chapter 5. Chapter 4, I peeked ahead. Chapter 6 is really the hot goss. I don't know if we'll get there. We'll try. I'm supposed to do a workout, but I'm so tired. We'll see what happens. All right. Chapter 5. By 1945, the House of Windsor had been remodeled. The Windsors had repainted their dark German foundation with bright British colors and fashioned the exterior with an attractive new facade. The false front concealed the family flaws and allowed the renovated German house to look decidedly English, so English that by the end of World War II, the dynasty designed by Dogery was never more popular. Having removed itself from politics and no longer in danger of being damaged by factional disputes, the institution stood as a model of respectability. The monarchy, personified by the royal family, symbolized duty, decorum, and decency. No, you don't. No. Of course, he's like, how about I climb over? No. After the Allies crushed Nazi Germany, Britons discarded their courageous wartime leader, Prime Minister Churchill, but they embraced their shy little monarch. On the day Germany surrendered, crowds surrounded Buckingham Palace, cheering and shouting for their beloved king and queen. The royal family, which embodied Britain's sense of high moral purpose, had become the center of life in the United Kingdom. As the royal couple stepped out onto the balcony to wave, a voice in the throng shouted, "Thank God for a good king!" Deeply moved, George VI stepped forward and stammered, "Thank God for a good people." Aw, that's so touching. With the war finally over, the king wanted to make up for the lost time with his family, especially with his elder daughter. He planned picnics at Sandringham and shoots, hunts, and deer stalks at Balmoral so she could take part in his favorite pursuits. Elizabeth enjoyed spending time with her father, but the 19-year-old heir presumptive, who had been confined to Windsor Castle for 6 years, longed to sample the swing music of London nightclubs. The dutiful daughter was growing up. She had her own lady-in-waiting, her own bedroom suite, and her own chauffeur-driven Daimler. She had never gone to school or visited a foreign country, and had yet to draw her own bath, prepare a meal, or pay a bill. But she was selecting her own clothes. While her future subjects were still restricted to clothing coupons and wearing skirts made of curtains and trousers cut down from overcoats, she had her own couturier, and was ordering strapless satin evening gowns. "I'd like a car of my own, too," she told a friend, "but there's so damn much family talk about which make I must have, and I don't think I'll ever get one." Everything pertaining to Elizabeth was subject to intense discussion. Her father was not a man of initiative. Afraid of putting the wrong foot forward, he worried constantly about appearances and what people might think. He did not feel secure about making a decision until he had consulted all his courtiers. His wife, who rarely worried about anything, could not always make up her mind about what was best for their older daughter. So whether it was a car, a fur coat, or a new horse for Elizabeth, it was never a casual decision for her parents. They wanted the best for her, recalled Crawfie, her governess, and it is never easy for parents to decide what that best is. The only topic the king and queen quickly reached agreement on was Philip of Greece. They felt their daughter was far too interested in the Navy lieutenant, not only because, but only because she had not met other men. I've got to slow down. Okay. I do this thing where I just get in a rush and then it's like my eyes jump ahead and I start grabbing words that are later on in the sentence and I insert them where they don't belong. Okay. So they started organizing tea dances, dinner parties, theater outings, and formal balls so she could meet the eligible sons of the aristocracy. They also invited the single military officers stationed near Windsor Castle. Elizabeth pronounced the chinless aristocrats as pompous, stuffy, and boring, and her sister dismissed the officers as afflicted with bad teeth, thick lips, and foul-smelling breath. Her parents' diversionary tactic was not lost on her grandmother, Queen Mary, who referred to the cluster of young officers suddenly popping up at the palace as the bodyguard. Queen Mary's lady-in-waiting thought the king was simply an overpossessive father who could not face the prospect of his elder daughters falling in love. He's desperate, she said. I can see why Philip would be he would be attractive to a lot of women, I think, honestly. But especially to Elizabeth as a princess who had been so confined, for 6 years. She's just holed up at Windsor Castle. She's had no real independence ever. She's never been anywhere, not even within her own country hardly. She's never set foot in a nightclub, apparently. There's just so many experiences she's never had. And then here's Philip, who's, tall and dashing, but on top of that, he's not stuffy. And he's had this very unconventional life, although, he is royal. He's experienced so many different things. He's strangely laid back and maybe self-confident as compared to some of the other guys that she's met. Yeah, he's well-traveled. And seems incredibly charming. And like I said, very confident. And that combination of being laid back and being confident is like, let me tell you, that'll get you every time. In 1946, when Philip returned to England, Elizabeth invited him to visit the family at Balmoral. She had not seen him for over 3 years. It had been Christmas of 1943 when he had chased her through the corridors of Windsor Castle wearing a huge set of clattering false teeth that made her scream with laughter. I once or twice spent Christmas at Windsor because I had nowhere particular to go, Philip admitted many years later. I suppose if I'd just been a casual acquaintance, it would all have been frightfully significant. But if you're related, I knew half the people there. They were all relations. It isn't so extraordinary to be on kind of family relationship terms with somebody. You don't necessarily have to think about marriage. At the time, Elizabeth had delighted in her cousins, and then it has a little note. Philip and Elizabeth were second cousins once removed through King Christian IX of Denmark, third cousins through Queen Victoria, and fourth cousins once removed through King George III. All right. At the time, Elizabeth had delighted in her cousin's juvenile antics and practical jokes, especially when he offered her nuts from a can and a toy snake popped out when he handed her dinner rolls. Oh. Okay, nuts from a can, the toy snake pops out, and he hands her dinner rolls and made what she called rude intestinal noises. She had laughed so hard at the time, she couldn't continue eating. Drawn to Philip's broad slapstick humor and his handsome good looks, she could hardly wait to see him again. She began asking her governess about love and marriage. "What, Crawfie," she asked, "makes a person fall in love?" I would try to explain to her the deep common interests that cannot only draw man and woman together immediately, but hold them together for life," said the governess. The princess listened attentively. "I guess it really started in earnest in Balmoral in 1946, Philip said, recalling the pretty 20-year-old princess who still laughed at his jokes. "I still recall the occasions when Prince Philip was an honored guest of Princess Lilibet, as we all called her, at those after-the-theater parties when he was on leave from the Navy," recalled René Rousson, the former royal chef. "Then I would be asked, as a special request from the princess, to send up some lobster patties, of which Prince Philip was especially fond." After Philip had spent several days with the royal family at their Scottish castle, the king felt he had overstayed his welcome. "The boy must go south," he told his favorite equerry, RAF Wing Commander Peter Townsend. So Philip left. He later invited Elizabeth to visit him at the Kensington Palace apartment of his aunt, the Marchioness of Milford Haven, and the Chester Street home of the Mountbattens. He also took Elizabeth to visit Mountbatten's older daughter, Patricia, and her new husband, John Brabourne, at their modest cottage in Kent. "It was an absolutely foreign way of life for her," recalled Brabourne. "She had never lived that sort of existence, and she was enchanted, though her maid could not believe it when she saw where we lived." Philip also took Elizabeth to Coppens, the home of the Duchess of Kent in Buckinghamshire, where he had spent many of his shore leaves. The Greek duchess, known as Marina, who had been imported to marry the homosexual Duke of Kent, was one of Philip's favorite relatives. After several visits to Coppens, Elizabeth trusted her enough to confide, "Daddy doesn't want me to see too much of Philip or anyone, so please don't tell him." The Duchess never did. Philip's cousin, Alexandra, who knew about the couple's secret visits to Coppens, remembered his passion for Cobbina Wright Jr. and wondered if he was simply toying with Elizabeth. "I only hope Philip isn't just flirting with her," she told Marina. "He's so casual that he flirts without realizing it." "I think his flirting days are over," replied the Duchess. "He would be the one to be hurt now, if it was all just a flirtation, or if it is not to be. One thing I'm sure about, those two would never do anything to hurt each other." Reflecting, I'm sure Alexandra hated to hear that, because you know she's jealous. That's why she's saying that thing like, "Oh, he flirts without knowing it." She mentioned earlier she was in love with him. Reflecting on their courtship many years later, Philip said, "I suppose one thing led to another. I suppose I began to think about it seriously. Oh, let me think now. When I got back in 1946 and went to Balmoral. It was probably then that we began to think about it seriously and even talk about it." After spending time at Balmoral in August 1946, Philip proposed, and Elizabeth accepted, secretly. This was the first time she had acted on her own without first consulting her parents. She then caused the first real argument she'd ever had with them by insisting she wanted to marry the penniless Greek prince. She knew that the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 specified that descendants of King George II had to get the permission of the monarch to marry, and that permission had to be declared in council before the marriage could take place. Elizabeth wanted her father's permission, but he did not want to give it. He confided his discomfort to his equerry, who shared the king's opinion of the brash young man and agreed that the king should delay making any decision. Elizabeth's only ally within the royal family was her grandmother, Queen Mary, whose arranged marriage to King George V had grown into a loving union that had produced 5 children. So when Prince Philip was ridiculed in her presence, she was not receptive. She frowned when he was derided as a product of a crank school with theories of complete social equality, where the boys were taught to mix with all and sundry. Queen Mary said nothing and stared straight ahead. "What sort of background would this be for a son-in-law to the king?" she was asked. "Useful," she said curtly. The cautious king consulted his courtiers about the possibility of his daughter's marrying Philip of Greece, and the courtiers reported back the results of a Sunday pictorial magazine poll showing that 40% of Britain's class-conscious readers did not favor the marriage because Philip was a foreigner. A century earlier, when Prince Albert came to England as Queen Victoria's husband, the courtiers called him that German. They called his aides German spies. Now, more than 100 years later, the courtiers exhibited a similar xenophobia. They called Philip Phil the Greek. Philip labeled himself as Scandinavian, particularly Danish. I mean, that's 100% true. They were Danish. They weren't Greek. The Greeks had imported the Danish royal family to be their royal family. So they were not actually Greek by blood at all. Particularly Danish, he told an interviewer. We spoke English at home, but then the conversation would go into French. Then it went into German on occasion because we had German cousins. If you couldn't think of a word in one language, you tended to go off in another. The daughter of the Duchess of Marlborough remembered her brothers mocking Philip behind his back for not being an aristocrat. He did not know the country life, she said. He came from the other side of the tracks, which attracted Elizabeth. That and the fact that he was dead glamorous, absolutely drop-dead glamorous. Although he was never quite digested into the British establishment, he decided in time to become just as pretentious, dull, and stuffy as the rest of us, while pushing his own personality uphill. Elizabeth stood fast against her father's disapproval. She argued that she hadn't asked to be born, and that if she, as an accident of birth, had to spend her life doing her duty as queen, the least he could do was let her marry the man she loved. After all, you married Mummy, she said. And she wasn't even royalty. Philip is. The king sighed and said he felt Elizabeth was too young to get married. The princess invoked Queen Victoria. She was only 20 years old when she married Prince Albert, and look how happy that marriage was. The king was not persuaded. As a father, he fretted about Philip's commitment to fidelity. He had been apprised of some of the young lieutenant's shore leaves with his Navy buddy Michael Parker and their visits to brothels in Alexandria. He did not like the sound of Philip's continuing relationship with his childhood friend, Hélène Foufounus Corday, and he heartily disapproved of Philip's midnight crawls through London's West End with his cousin David Milford Haven. Yeah, he does give fuckboy energy, doesn't he? Big time. But you don't know that when you're 20. But when you're a little older, you run for the hills. When you're young, like, that fuckboy energy is so attractive because it is that nonchalance. It is that confidence and that relaxed manner. And it is intriguing. But, yeah. I remember when my boyfriend and I had our first date. So we had sort of a blind date. And when he showed up, I got there first because I was like, I'll be danged if I'm going to walk in and he's going to be sitting there like I met him at the place. And we didn't meet through a dating app. We met through a friend. Anyway, I don't know why I had to say that because it was sounding like it was a dating app thing. So we met through a friend and then we agreed to go on this date. And I remember sitting there waiting and he walked in. And when he came to the table, he was nervous. He stood there awkwardly, and he was so nervous. And I liked that so much. It made me like him right away. Because as you get older, I remember my dad telling me when I was a teenager, and of course I didn't listen. He said, if someone is not a little bit nervous when they are meeting you like that for the first time, it's because they've had a lot of practice. So, I found that to be true over the years. Okay, so he's visiting brothels. Yeehaw. But the king was growing anxious over his daughter's increasing willfulness and determination to marry Philip. She knew that because she was heir presumptive, her marriage required her father's approval, as well as that of the government and the Commonwealth. Yet she alarmed her father when she intimated that if he did not give her permission to marry Philip, she would follow the footsteps of her uncle, the Duke of Windsor, who abdicated to marry the person he loved. The princess's apparent willingness to put love before duty was noted even by the U.S. ambassador to the court of St. James's, Lewis Douglas, a close friend of the royal family. He informed the State Department in a 1947 memo. It was learned that Princess Elizabeth had determined to marry Prince Philip and declared that if objections were raised, she would not hesitate to follow the example of her uncle, King Edward VIII, and abdicate. She has a firm character. More than 40 years later, one of the king's former aides quaked at the mention of the 1936 abdication by the Duke of Windsor, which is still considered a sacrilege within royal circles. The princess did not threaten to do that exactly, said the aide in an effort to clarify the record. She only indicated that she could understand the romance behind her uncle's rationale. That's a far cry from declaring her intention to abdicate. In public, Elizabeth could no longer hide her feelings. Her adoration of Philip was so obvious that rumors began circulating, prompting the foreign press to report that the couple were informally engaged. The British press did not dare to make such a conjecture. Still, nervous about world opinion, the king told the palace to officially deny the report. 5 such denials were issued in the fall of 1945. I suppose Philip loved Elizabeth, but it doesn't seem like he passionately loved her, Like the way that he passionately loved Cabina, and he wrote her letters twice a week for 3 years. Like, he was steadfast. He really wanted to marry her. He wanted to marry her so much that he was going to give up Elizabeth to marry Cabina. So when rumors are circulating that she's so in love with him and not the other way around, that's sad. After Philip proposed to Elizabeth, he applied for naturalization as Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N. First, he took his uncle's advice, then his name. Years later, Philip discounted his uncle's influence. I wasn't madly in favor of the name, he told the biographer in 1971, but in the end I was persuaded, and anyway, I couldn't think of a better alternative. Contrary to public impression, Uncle Dickie didn't have that much to do with the course of my life. Okay, Philip. Having given up his royal title, Philip next renounced the Greek Orthodox Church to join the Church of England. On December 16, 1946, the New York Times reported on the front page that only politics, which has blighted so many royal romances, is delaying the announcement of the engagement of Princess Elizabeth, heiress to the British throne, and Prince Philip of Greece. Again, the palace issued a denial. The king was beside himself. Becoming increasingly irritable and bad-tempered, he drank heavily from the whiskey decanter that he insisted be placed next to his plate at every dinner. He was war-weary. His war-weary country, though, was still scraping by on rations for food and fuel. Besides these shortages, Britain was beset by another problem. With millions of military being demobilized, the ranks of the unemployed swelled. And with Winston Churchill banished in defeat, the king was forced to deal with a new prime minister, in Clement Attlee, and a Labour government that the conservative monarch considered far too socialist. When someone told Winston Churchill that Attlee was a modest man, Churchill agreed. He has every reason to be modest. Oh man, that is a lost art, isn't it? Being able to insult someone so gracefully. The king wrote gloomily in 1946, "Food, clothes, and fuel are the main topics of conversation with us all." He grew impatient with everyone, especially his cousin, Dickie Mountbatten. You're going to have to get down. Who strutted like a peacock after the new Labour government appointed him, Viceroy of India, where he was to oversee that nation's progress to independence. The Queen complained that Dickie was showing off his medals again and getting more coverage on movie-tone news than the king. There's a little note. Movietone News was a newsreel shown in movie houses before the advent of television. By buying tickets to a cinema, people could see the news before or after the featured film. Newsreels, created in 1909, were especially popular in the 1930s and 1940s. The British writer Nigel Nicholson recalls watching a newsreel in London in 1947 with his friend Sybil Colfax. They had come to see the Mountbatten's departure from India at the end of his term as Viceroy. They were seen off at the airport by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, said Nicholson. As the plane took off, Sybil said to me, "But what they don't show was that Edwina at the last moment kissed Nehru full on the lips," which deeply shocked Indian feelings, undoing all the good that Dickie had done. The woman sitting immediately in front of us turned and said, "Hello, Sybil." It was Edwina Mountbatten, and sitting beside her was her husband. They had come incognito to the cinema to watch themselves. There was little doubt that they'd heard what Sybil said. I whispered to her, "Would you like to leave?" "I think we'd better," she replied. We left. Years later, the Queen would ridicule Mountbatten's 2-column entry in Who's Who as overblown and characteristically pompous. You get out of here. Sorry, it's my cat. He is determined to lay himself right where he shouldn't be. You go on now. You go on. Go. She became especially annoyed when he insisted on having his own honors list so he could bestow knighthoods in India, just as the king did in England. She expressed her objection to Prime Minister Attlee, who agreed with her. "No one in a century has had such powers," Attlee said, but he insisted as a precondition to accepting the job. As irritated as the king was, he felt that his biggest problem was not Mountbatten, but his nephew Philip, and the problems he posed as consort to the future Queen of England. His beloved daughter was balking at having to leave her secret fiancé at home to accompany her family on a 10-week tour of South Africa, which would include her 21st birthday. But the king insisted. The trip had been planned for 4 months to thank the South Africans for throwing out their prime minister and supporting Great Britain during the war. The king believed that the wounds splitting South Africa could be healed by the balm of royalty. As the first monarch to travel with his family, he wanted Elizabeth by his side as he opened the Union Parliament in Cape Town. Expecting a royal reception from the Africans, he decreed a ration-busting wardrobe for himself and his family, consisting of pearls and diamonds, cloths of gold, and endless yards of silk and satin, which required weeks of fittings and interminable work by dozens of seamstresses. The ordinary Briton received an annual clothing ration of 48 to 66 coupons. But the royal family received 160 extra coupons a year. For their South Africa wardrobe, they were issued 4,329 coupons. What? The New York Times described the result as the most sumptuous wardrobe ever worn by British royalty. On her 21st birthday, Elizabeth was to make a coming-of-age speech in which she, as the future monarch, dedicated herself to her countrymen. The speech was broadcast around the world. Dutifully, she rehearsed it, but each time, she said, the solemn words made her cry. "I declare before you that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial commonwealth, to which we all belong. But I shall not have the strength to carry out this resolution unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God bless all of you who are willing to share it." And there's a little note. The next year, 1948, the Labour government passed the British Nationality Act, making Commonwealth citizenship equivalent to British citizenship, thus giving every citizen of the Commonwealth a legal right to reside in the United Kingdom. Well, is that still in effect? Because I'm a member of the Commonwealth. When the Commonwealth was established, members agreed that the British monarch should be the symbol of the free association of Commonwealth nations, and as such head of the Commonwealth, regardless of whether a member country retained the British monarch as its head of state. By 1997, the Commonwealth had 53 member states with a combined population of 1.4 billion. Finally, against his better judgment, the king relented. He agreed to allow his daughter to marry Philip, provided Philip, who changed his name, his nationality, and his religion, was deemed acceptable by the British establishment. His uncle quickly introduced him to Britain's most powerful press lords, who agreed that his relationship to Queen Victoria, he, like Elizabeth, was a great-great-grandchild, and his service in the Royal Navy qualified him as suitable. Still, the king declined to announce the engagement. He ordered absolute secrecy about any future plans until after the tour of South Africa, hoping against hope that Elizabeth might change her mind. He instructed the palace to keep denying the rumors swarming around the couple, and he demanded total discretion from Philip. He forbade him to be seen with Elizabeth in public until after the royal family returned in 1947. He had told Philip that he could not see the family off at Waterloo Station, and he could not go aboard their ship at Portsmouth to say goodbye. The king would not allow his future son-in-law to attend the Bon Voyage luncheon at Buckingham Palace with the royal household staff, or to be at the pier to welcome the royal family home 10 weeks later. He did say Philip could write his fiancée during the trip, and he allowed him to attend his engagement party with the royal family and the Lord and Lady Mountbatten at their London home on Chester Street 2 nights before departure. There the two families secretly celebrated the announcement, which would not be made official for several months. That night the king drank heavily. Aboard ship, the Queen took comfort in the kindness of Surgeon Rear Admiral Henry Chippy White, who accompanied the royal family to South Africa, where he retired the following year. Chippy White, whose son was my uncle, was knighted for his service to the king, said Hugh Bygott Webb. But I don't think that KCVO, Knight Commander of the Victorian Order, included his love affair with the king's wife. Now, I have no absolute proof of this love affair with the Queen, who later became the Queen Mother, but their romance, accompanied by love letters, has been assumed within the family for years and years. The letters remain in the family and always will. Ghastly. In photographs taken during the South African tour, the Queen beamed, while her daughter Elizabeth looked bored and distracted, except during the celebration of her 21st birthday on April 21st, 1947, in Cape Town. Fated with salutes all day and a grand ball with fireworks in the evening, Elizabeth spent the morning opening birthday presents of extravagant proportions, a platinum brooch in the shape of a flame lily set with 300 diamonds, and paid for with 1 week's pocket money collected from 42,000 Rhodesian school children. Oh, that is precious, isn't it? Sorry, the cat has just shed into my eyeball. A pair of diamond flower petal earrings from the members of the royal households, who barely made £1,000 a year. A diamond-studded badge of the Grenadier Guards, her favorite regiment, of which she was the colonel, and from her parents a twin pair of Cartier ivy-leaf brooches covered with 2,000 pavé diamonds, surrounded by 2 5-carat diamonds in the center. The state gifts from South Africa, worth more than $1 million at the time, were equally lavish. The king received a gold box full of diamonds to put on his garter star, and the Queen was given an engraved 22-carat gold tea service. Princess Margaret received a necklace of 17 graduated diamonds, and Elizabeth was given a silver chest containing 21 graduated brilliant-cut diamonds, some weighing 10 carats interspersed with baguettes. Oh, one moment. Okay. Laden with jewels, the royal family returned to England in May 1947. But the king still wouldn't announce his daughter's engagement. He excluded Philip's name from the Royal Ascot house party at Windsor Castle. But on July 8, Philip, who was teaching at the Royal Navy Petty Officer School at Kingsmore, phoned the king. He asked permission to go to Buckingham Palace that evening to give Elizabeth a 3-carat diamond engagement ring that had belonged to his mother. There's a little note. The official engagement photograph shows Philip, handsome in his uniform, beside Elizabeth, her hands folded to display her platinum ring. A friend recalled how thrilled she was with the ring, which symbolized the end of her drab years and the beginning of a happy future. Elizabeth said, "It's like turning a page in a book." Poor thing. The king consented and graciously invited his future son-in-law for dinner. Philip drove his sporty MG 98 miles from Wiltshire to London. 2 days later, the engagement was announced by the same palace spokesman who had been denying it for 2 years. "We got engaged," said Elizabeth's dresser, Margaret Bobo MacDonald, on the day the betrothal was announced. So close was she to Elizabeth that she frequently talked of herself and her future sovereign as a single person. The Scotswoman who had been with Elizabeth since she was born would accompany her on her honeymoon and serve her morning coffee every day until Bobo died in 1993, 47 years later. The wedding was set for November 20th, 1947, but again over the king's objections. Citing the coal shortage and the country's economic collapse, he suggested a quiet ceremony at St. George's Chapel in Windsor to minimize the expense of pomp and ceremony. But Elizabeth and her mother insisted on a big wedding. The king tried to stall the inevitable by suggesting June of the next year, when he said the weather would be warmer. Elizabeth said she didn't care if it snowed. She was getting married in November. The British press reported the engagement as the love match of the century. "This is no arranged marriage," said the Daily Mail. "The couple is well and truly in love," said the Daily Telegraph. Skeptical Americans did not try to dispute the matter. The world, seeing this pretty girl and young Navy officer together, will like to think of this as a love match rather than as any union dictated by politics, declared an editorial in the New York Times. I don't know. What do you guys think? I have no doubt that Elizabeth was desperately in love with Philip, but I don't think he was. I think he cared about her, and I think he loved her, but I don't think he was in love with her, personally. Arranged marriages were not foreign to Philip. Until 1923, such marriages had been made the rule of royalty, not the exception. Love was seldom an option, as he knew from the marriages of his parents, his 2 Mountbatten uncles, and all of his cousins, including Marina, the impoverished Greek princess who had been imported to England to straighten out the bisexual Duke of Kent. Ever pragmatic, Philip, too, was marrying for a reason. "Why do you think I'm getting married?" he asked Cobbina Wright. "I'll tell you. It's because I've never really had a home. From the time I was 8, I've always been away at school or in the Navy." Almost a quarter century later, Philip admitted publicly that his marriage to Elizabeth had been arranged. There was their excursion to South Africa, and then it was sort of fixed up when they came back, he told his biographer, Basil Boothroyd, in 1971. That's really what happened. By then, he had been married to Elizabeth for 24 years, provided a male heir to the throne, and become resigned to his role as consort. Beyond that, he had learned to be discreet about the life he led with other women. That's not to say he wasn't fond of Elizabeth when he married her, said his friend Larry Adler, the American harmonica player who moved to England after being blacklisted as a suspected communist in America. He belonged to Philip's male luncheon group, known as the Thursday Club. Was he in love with Elizabeth? No, but he had a great deal of respect for her. That's sad. Sorry, I just got melancholy thinking, like, meh. So much so that when someone suggested Philip was marrying the ugly duckling and that Princess Margaret was far prettier than her sister, he flared. "You wouldn't say that if you knew them. Elizabeth is sweet and kind," he said, "just like her mother." Was her mother sweet and kind? As soon as the engagement was announced, Uncle Dickie, writing from India, bombarded his nephew with advice about how to arrange the wedding and how the new household should be run. He offered Broadlands, his home in Hampshire, for the honeymoon, suggesting Philip and Elizabeth use Edwina's suite. It featured Salvador Dali paintings and a magnificent 4-poster Tudor bed with an ivory satin headboard and those lurid pink satin sheets. Philip accepted his uncle's hospitality, but only for a few days. He said his bride wanted to spend most of the honeymoon at Birkall, the small royal house on the 24,000 acres of Balmoral in Scotland. Then he cautioned his mentor. I am not being rude, but it is apparent that you like the idea of being the general manager of this little show, and I am rather afraid that she might not take to the idea quite as docilely as I do. It is true that I know what is good for me, but don't forget that she has not had you as Uncle Loco Parentis, counselor and friend, as long as I have. All right, we're going to stop there for right now, and hopefully I'll jump back on again tomorrow. But I am stuttering and stammering, and I'm tired, so I'm going to put myself to bed. Thank you so much for being with me. I will see you soon. Bye.